I stood at the edge of my property, watching the sheriff's cruiser crawl up my gravel driveway, its tires crunching on the stone with a sound that matched the grinding of my teeth. Behind it trailed Karen Millbrook's shiny Mercedes, and I knew exactly why they were here. The self-appointed queen of the Pinecrest Homeowners Association was making her move, but what she didn't know was that I'd just made mine. I'd spent my life savings on something she desperately needed, and by the time this day was over, one of us would be drowning. Not literally, of course, but close enough. Mr. Quinn, Sheriff Donner called out as he stepped from his vehicle. Got a complaint about your property here. I nodded respectfully. Sheriff. I figured as much. Karen emerged from her car like a storm cloud, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the overcast day. Her perfectly highlighted bob didn't move an inch in the lake breeze as she marched toward us, clipboard in hand like some kind of bureaucratic weapon. There he is, she announced, as if the sheriff might have missed the only other person standing on my own property. I've documented 17 violations of the Pinecrest HOA covenant, Sheriff. I expect you to enforce our legally binding agreement immediately. I'd bought this cabin 6 months ago after 15 years in the Army and 3 tours overseas. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms overlooking Lake Evergreen with enough land to breathe, but it was mine. Or so I thought until Karen Millbrook decided otherwise. Sheriff Donner looked uncomfortable. I'd known him since high school, and he wasn't the type to enjoy being used as an HOA enforcement tool. Cole MS. Millbrook here says you've failed to comply with multiple notices. He shifted his weight. Says you're affecting property values with your improvements. That's one way to put it, I said, keeping my voice level. Another way is that I'm renovating a cabin that was falling apart when I bought it, on land that I own. Karen stepped forward, heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. Mr. Quinn, you purchased property within our covenant-controlled community. The rules clearly state that I need to paint my house one of your approved colors, plant only native species, and keep my boat in the community dock rather than on my own shore? I finished for her. Yeah, I've read your 17 violation notices. I've also read something else you might find interesting. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded document still crisp from the county clerk's office. What's that? Karen demanded, her perfectly shaped eyebrows furrowing. Deed to the Evergreen Lake Water Company, I said, unable to keep the satisfaction from my voice. Closed the deal yesterday. Turns out the old owner was looking to retire. The sheriff's eyes widened, but it was Karen's reaction that was truly priceless. Her face went from smug superiority to shock in an instant, her mouth opening and closing like one of the trout in my lake. That's impossible, she sputtered. The HOA has a contract with Evergreen Lake Water Company. You did, I corrected her. Now you have one with me. Or you don't? We should probably discuss that. Sheriff Donner cleared his throat. Cole, you bought the water company? The one that supplies the whole Pinecrest development? I nodded. Spent every penny I had saved from my military service and my construction business. Seemed like a good investment. Karen's face had transitioned from shock to a dangerous shade of red. This is blackmail. You can't just cut off our water supply. I never said anything about cutting off water, I replied calmly. But since you mentioned contracts, I'd like to review ours. After all, as the new owner, I should understand my obligations and my rights. The sheriff looked between us, clearly sensing he'd been called out for something well beyond code enforcement. Ms. Millbrook, this sounds like a civil matter between Mr. Quinn and your association. Not something that requires law enforcement. Karen wasn't ready to back down. He's violating legally binding covenants. And that's for your HOA and him to work out, Sheriff Donner replied. Unless there's an actual crime being committed, I'm not the right tool for this job. He tipped his hat to me. Cole. As the sheriff walked back to his cruiser, Karen stared me down with a look that could have frozen the lake solid. You think you're clever, Quinn? This isn't over. I smiled. Actually, Karen, I think it's just beginning. Why don't you come inside? I've got coffee on, and we can discuss the new terms of our relationship. She glanced at her Mercedes, then back at my cabin with its unapproved navy blue paint and the dock I built without permission. I could almost see the calculations running behind her eyes. With a curt nod, she followed me up the steps to my front porch. What she didn't know was that the water company wasn't my only purchase this week. I'd also bought something else, information. And by the time our coffee was cold, Karen Millbrook's reign of terror over Pinecrest was going to be on very thin ice. I poured Karen a cup of coffee in my kitchen, watching as she pointedly remained standing, refusing to sit at my rustic, her word, dining table. The kitchen was open to the living room, where large windows showcased the lake view, the reason I'd fallen in love with this place. "You're making a mistake," she said, not touching the coffee. "The HOA has legal standing. So does the water company," I replied, leaning against the counter. "Which now belongs to me. You can't possibly have the funds to manage a water utility," she sniffed. I smiled. 15 years of combat pay with nowhere to spend it adds up. Plus, my construction company's doing well. People around here appreciate quality work at fair prices. Karen's eyes narrowed. "This is about revenge. Because I enforced the rules you agreed to when you purchased this property." "Rules?" I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, we both know this isn't about rules. It's about power. You've been using the HOA to bully everyone in Pinecrest for years." Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her clipboard. "I've been maintaining community standards and property values. Something you clearly don't care about with your eyesore improvements." I took a sip of my coffee. "Let's talk about those improvements. You cited me for unauthorized renovations. I'm a licensed contractor who pulled every required permit from the county. You cited me for my dock, which is fully permitted by the Department of Natural Resources. You even cited me for the color of my house, despite the fact that navy blue is listed as an approved color in the very covenant you keep waving in my face. That's midnight sapphire, not Naval Academy blue," she said with the conviction of someone who believed the difference mattered to anyone but her. I set down my mug. "Here's what's happening, Karen. I bought this cabin to enjoy some peace after spending a decade and a half at war. Instead, I've been fighting you for 6 months. That ends today." "Is that a threat?" she asked, her voice rising. "It's a fact. I'm not just the owner of the water company now. I've also been talking to your neighbors. All of them." Something flickered across her face, worry, perhaps. "What do you mean?" I walked over to a drawer and pulled out a folder thick with papers. "Did you know that Stanley Green never authorized you to send a fine notice to the Wilsons for their bird feeder? Or that the board never voted on the ban of wind chimes that you've been enforcing? Or that you've been collecting special assessment fees that don't appear in the HOA financial records?" Karen's face paled slightly beneath her perfect makeup. "Those are HOA matters that don't concern you. They concern every homeowner in Pinecrest, including me. But here's something else that might interest you." I pulled out another document. "This is a copy of the water company's contract with Pinecrest HOA. There's an interesting clause about service reliability standards. Apparently, the HOA president personally insisted on adding it 3 years ago." She stiffened. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you that as the new owner, I'll be conducting a comprehensive system inspection. Might require some service interruptions. The contract you signed gives me that right." Karen set down her clipboard with a snap. "You would cut off water to innocent families just to get back at me?" I shook my head. "I'd never do that. But I might need to temporarily redirect service while inspecting certain lines. Starting with your street. Today." Before she could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and smiled. Perfect timing. That's my friend at the county assessor's office. "Seems they've found some discrepancies in the HOA's property tax filings. Something about improvements to common areas that don't actually exist? Karen's composed facade cracked. You've been investigating me? Not initially. I just wanted to be left alone in my cabin. But when you kept coming after me, I started asking questions. And people had a lot of answers, Karen. Interesting ones. She took a step back, bumping into the counter. What do you want? Initially? Just to be left alone. Now? A complete audit of the HOA books, your immediate resignation from the board, and restitution to everyone you've wrongfully fined. I leaned forward. Or we can let the county prosecutor sort it out. I hear she's particularly interested in misappropriation of funds cases these days. Karen's face had lost all color now. You don't understand. I've worked too hard to build Pinecrest into what it is. You're right about one thing, I said. I don't understand using a position of small authority to torment your neighbors. But I do understand justice. My phone buzzed again. Another text. The inspector is at your street now, I said. He's going to shut off your water for a routine inspection that might take, a few days? Unless there's some reason I should tell him to hold off. Karen's perfectly crafted exterior was crumbling before my eyes. This is extortion. This is consequences, I corrected her. Something long overdue at Pinecrest. She stared at me for a long moment, calculation visible behind her eyes. Then she reached for her phone. I need to make a call. Take your time, I said, gesturing to my porch. The view's nice out there. Helps with thinking clearly. As Karen stepped outside to make her call, I wondered who she was contacting. Her lawyer? The other board members? Or perhaps someone else entirely? What I'd learned about Karen Millbrook suggested she wouldn't go down without a fight, and she might have more resources at her disposal than I realized. I glanced at the folder of evidence on my counter. There was more in there than I'd let on, much more. What had started as self-defense against an overzealous HOA president had uncovered something that looked increasingly like systematic fraud. But I still didn't know how deep it went, or who else might be involved. I looked out the window at Karen pacing my porch, her phone pressed to her ear, gesticulating wildly. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. The peaceful lake retreat I dreamed of was still a long way off. Karen returned 10 minutes later, her composure partially restored and a thin smile on her face. I've spoken to my attorney, she announced. He agrees this is a civil matter best resolved between us directly. Something in her tone made me wary. And I'm prepared to be reasonable. The HOA will grant you a variance for your renovations. In exchange, we expect normal water service to continue uninterrupted. I crossed my arms. That's not going to cut it, Karen. This isn't just about my cabin anymore. Fine, she said, her smile tightening. I'll also withdraw the violations against your property. Clean slate. And the financial discrepancies? The unauthorized fines? The misappropriated funds? Her eyes narrowed. You're overreaching, Mr. Quinn. You have no proof of any financial impropriety. I picked up the folder. Bank statements showing HOA funds being transferred to Millbrook Consulting. Invoices for community improvements that neighbors confirm never happened. 3 years of special assessments that don't appear in the annual budget. Want me to go on? For just a moment, genuine fear flashed across Karen's face before she masked it with indignation. Those documents were obtained illegally. They'd never be admissible. I'm not a prosecutor, Karen. But I know people who are. And every document in this folder came from either public records or homeowners who voluntarily shared their correspondence with you. She fell silent, her mind clearly racing. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to resign from the HOA board, effective immediately. You're going to return every dollar of misappropriated funds. And you're going to issue written apologies to everyone you've harassed with your made-up violations. Or what? She challenged, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Or I turn everything over to Sheriff Donner, and the county prosecutor. And while they're investigating, I'll be conducting very thorough, very disruptive inspections of the water system, starting with your street, as I mentioned. Karen's jaw tightened. You can't prove intent. At worst, they'll find some accounting irregularities that can be explained away. That's when I knew she was more worried than she was letting on. She wasn't denying the evidence, she was already preparing her defense. Maybe, I conceded. But your neighbors will know. The community you claim to care so much about will know exactly what you've been doing. And from what I've gathered, there's nothing you value more than your reputation in Pinecrest. Something shifted in Karen's eyes, a calculation being made, a new strategy forming. I need time to consider my options, she said finally, and to consult further with my attorney. I checked my watch. You have until 5 p.m. today. After that, I meet with Sheriff Donner. She gathered her things, movements stiff with suppressed anger. At the door, she paused and turned back. You've made a serious miscalculation, Mr. Quinn. I've lived in Pinecrest for 20 years. I know everyone who matters. You've been here 6 months. Think about that before you go to war with me. After she left, I stood on my porch and watched her Mercedes disappear down the road. Despite my confident stance, I felt a twinge of unease. Karen's parting words hadn't been just bluster, they'd been a warning. And something told me she had resources I hadn't yet discovered. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah Walker, my neighbor from 2 cabins down and one of the first people to befriend me when I moved in. Cole, she said when I answered, her voice urgent. I just saw Karen Millbrook leaving your place. What happened? Long story, I replied. But the short version is, I think I just declared war on the HOA queen. Sarah's sharp intake of breath didn't boost my confidence. You need to be careful. Karen has connections you wouldn't believe. What kind of connections? I asked, suddenly alert. Her brother-in-law is on the county commission. Her cousin works for the largest bank in the area, the one that holds most of the mortgages in Pinecrest. And she has some kind of relationship with the developer who's trying to buy up lakefront property for that resort project. I frowned. What developer? Lakeside Ventures. They've been quietly approaching owners about selling. Offering good money too. But only for properties that meet certain criteria. My mind was racing now. Like properties with direct lake access? Corner lots? Or maybe properties near the water supply infrastructure? Sarah paused. How did you know? Just connecting some dots, I said, though my stomach was tightening. Sarah, do you know if Karen has any financial interest in this development project? Not officially, she replied. But there's been talk. Her husband's investment firm is rumored to be one of the backers. I thanked Sarah and hung up, my mind whirling with this new information. I walked back inside and spread the documents across my dining table, looking for something I might have missed before. The pattern of HOA violations suddenly appeared in a new light. The heaviest fines and enforcement actions had been targeted at properties that would be most valuable to a resort developer. Was Karen using her HOA position to pressure certain homeowners to sell? Creating a hostile environment so they'd be more receptive to buyout offers? I was so absorbed in the documents that I almost missed the sound of tires on gravel. Looking out the window, I saw a black SUV with tinted windows pulling up my driveway. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, followed by Karen Millbrook. It hadn't even been 2 hours since she'd left, and she was already back, with reinforcements. I had a feeling my 5 p.m. deadline had just been moved up significantly. I opened the door before they could knock, determined to maintain whatever advantage I still had. Back so soon, Karen? And with a friend. The man stepped forward, extending his hand. Maxwell Thornton, CEO of Lakeside Ventures. I understand you and I have some matters to discuss, Mr. Quinn. I didn't take his offered hand. Interesting. I wasn't aware that I had any business with Lakeside Ventures. Thornton smiled, the practiced smile of someone used to getting his way through charm when money alone wouldn't do the trick. You do now that you own Evergreen Lake Water Company. May we come in? I stepped aside, letting them enter. Karen seemed transformed, the anger from earlier replaced with smug confidence. Whatever she and Thornton had planned, she clearly thought it would work in her favor. Mr. Quinn, Thornton began once we were seated in my living room. I'll be direct. Lakeside Ventures has been working on a significant development project for Lake Evergreen. A resort that will bring jobs and tax revenue to this county. And make a tidy profit for its investors. I added. Including, I'm guessing, Karen's husband's firm? Karen's smile faltered slightly, but Thornton continued smoothly. All parties stand to benefit, including the current homeowners. Our plan includes purchasing strategic properties at well above market value. And the water company? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A key component of our infrastructure planning. Thornton confirmed. We were in negotiations with the previous owner when you unexpectedly entered the picture. Snatched it out from under you, you mean? Thornton leaned forward. Mr. Quinn, I'm prepared to offer you 3 times what you paid for the water company. Cash deal, immediate closing. I raised an eyebrow. That's a generous offer for something you're characterizing as merely a component of your plan. We value efficiency, he replied. And we're on a timeline. I glanced at Karen, whose earlier confidence was now tinged with impatience. And I'm guessing if I refuse, the HOA violations against my property will mysteriously multiply? Or perhaps the county building inspector, friend of Karen's brother-in-law on the commission, finds problems with my perfectly legal renovations. Thornton's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. I prefer to focus on the positive outcomes for all involved. 3 times your investment is quite substantial. You could buy a much nicer property elsewhere. Elsewhere, I repeated. Because you need this particular stretch of lakefront, don't you? For your resort's main access point. My cabin and the surrounding properties are the linchpin to your whole development. Karen shifted uncomfortably, but Thornton maintained his composure. You've done your homework, he acknowledged. Yes, this area is ideal for our purposes. All the more reason to make it worth your while to cooperate. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lake. You know, I bought this place because it reminded me of where I grew up. Before developers came in and turned the shoreline into a row of condos and tourist shops. Before the water got cloudy with boat traffic and the loons stopped nesting. Progress is inevitable, Mr. Quinn, Thornton said. The question is whether you benefit from it or get left behind. I turned back to face them. And the other homeowners? The ones who've been harassed with HOA violations to pressure them into selling? Do they benefit too? Karen stood abruptly. That's an outrageous accusation. The HOA simply enforces the covenants that everyone agreed to. Selectively enforces, I corrected. Against the properties Lakeside wants to acquire. Quite a coincidence. Thornton raised a hand in a calming gesture. Let's stay focused on the matter at hand. My offer for the water company. 3 times your investment. Today. I shook my head. Not interested. 4 times, then? He countered without hesitation. My final offer. It's not about the money, Mr. Thornton. His cordial facade slipped slightly. Everything is about money eventually, Mr. Quinn. You'd be wise to remember that. Karen's phone chimed with a text. She glanced at it, then gave Thornton a subtle nod. Well, Thornton said, standing, I'm disappointed we couldn't reach an agreement today. But I respect your position and hope we can continue this conversation soon. You have my card. He placed a business card on my coffee table, heavy stock, minimalist design, just his name and phone number. We'll be in touch, Karen added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. As they headed toward the door, Thornton paused. One last thing, Mr. Quinn. The county commission is voting next week on new regulations for private water utilities. Safety requirements, infrastructure standards, quite costly for small operators. I'd hate to see your new investment become a financial burden. The threat wasn't even thinly veiled. I kept my expression neutral. Thanks for the concern. After they left, I watched through the window as they sat in Thornton's SUV for several minutes, clearly discussing their next move. Whatever it was, I knew I needed to prepare for it quickly. I pulled out my phone and called the one person who might be able to help me navigate what was coming. Marcus? It's Cole Quinn. Remember that favor you owe me from Fallujah? I'm cashing in. Night fell over Lake Evergreen, bringing with it a stillness that would normally have soothed me. Instead, I sat on my porch, nursing a beer and watching headlights occasionally trace the road on the far shore. My conversation with Marcus had been enlightening and disturbing. Marcus Davis had been a fellow Army Ranger who'd gone on to become an investigative journalist specializing in corporate corruption. When I'd called in my favor, he'd been surprisingly familiar with lakeside ventures already. "They're bad news, Cole," he'd told me. "Shell companies within shell companies, but if you dig deep enough, there's money coming in from some questionable international sources." They'd developed 3 other lake communities in the Midwest, and every time, there's been environmental damage they've managed to cover up or pay their way out of. "And local officials?" I'd asked. "Usually in their pocket by the time the project goes public. Campaign contributions, consulting contracts for family members, property deals at favorable terms. Standard playbook." I took another sip of beer, replaying the conversation in my mind. Marcus had promised to send me everything he had on Lakeside by morning, but had warned me to be careful. These people play for keeps, Cole. If you're standing between them and serious money, they won't hesitate to come after you. And not just with lawyers. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Strange men asking questions about you in the Pinetop bar tonight. Didn't look local." I texted back. "What kind of questions?" Her response came quickly. "Your background. How long you've been here. If you have family nearby." One asked if you ever seemed unstable. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Unstable was a loaded word, especially for a combat veteran. Were they looking for angles to discredit me? Or something worse? "Thanks for the heads up," I texted back. "Stay clear of them if you can." I went inside, double-checking that my doors were locked, something I rarely bothered with out here. My service weapon was secured in my bedroom safe, and I'd briefly considered taking it out. Paranoid? Maybe. But 15 years in combat zones had taught me to trust my instincts. Instead, I sat at my dining table and opened my laptop. If Lakeside and Karen were digging into my background, I needed to know exactly what they might find, and what they might try to use against me. A quick search brought up my military record, public parts of it, anyway. Honorable discharge, commendations, nothing that would raise eyebrows. My construction business had a perfect BBB rating and good online reviews. But there was one potential vulnerability: my VA medical records. Like many veterans, I'd sought treatment for PTSD after returning to civilian life. The records were private, but with the right connections or the right pressure applied to the right person. My phone rang, startling me. Unknown number. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Mr. Quinn? This is Dr. Harriet Feldman from the VA Medical Center." My stomach tightened. "Yes, doctor. I'm sorry to call so late, but I wanted to alert you that someone attempted to access your medical records today. They had some of your personal information and claimed to be from your primary care physician's office." I gripped the phone tighter. "Were they successful?" "No," she assured me. "Our security protocols prevented the access. But it was concerning enough that I wanted to personally let you know. We've flagged your file for additional protection." "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful. "Can you tell who tried to access it?" "The request came from a law firm, Branson, Wild & Associates. Does that name mean anything to you?" It didn't, but I made a mental note to have Marcus check it out. "Not offhand. Thanks for the warning, doctor." After hanging up, I sat back, mind racing. They were moving faster than I'd anticipated. Trying to get my medical records, asking around town about my mental state, they were building a narrative. The unstable veteran. The PTSD sufferer. Laying groundwork to discredit me or, worse, to build a case that I was unfit to operate a water utility. I opened my email and drafted a message to every Pinecrest homeowner whose contact information I had, attaching documents showing the pattern of targeted HOA violations against properties Lakeside wanted to acquire. I included what I'd learned about Karen's connections to the development project and my suspicions about the misappropriated HOA funds. My finger hovered over the send button. Once I sent this, there would be no turning back. Karen and Thornton would come at me with everything they had. Before I could decide, headlights swept across my window as a vehicle pulled into my driveway. I moved to the side of the window, staying out of sight as I peered out. A county sheriff's cruiser, but not Sheriff Donner's. A deputy I didn't recognize stepped out, adjusting his hat before walking toward my porch. I considered my options. Not answering would only delay whatever this was, and might make me look like I had something to hide. I opened the door just as he raised his hand to knock. "Can I help you, deputy?" He looked startled, then recovered. "Cole Quinn? That's me. Deputy Walsh, County Sheriff's Department. We've received a complaint about threatening behavior." I kept my face neutral. "Threatening behavior?" "Yes, sir. Karen Millbrook has filed a report stating that you threatened to cut off water service to her home and others in the Pinecrest development as a form of intimidation." Of course. They were moving pieces into place, creating an official record. "That's not accurate, deputy. As the new owner of the Evergreen Lake Water Company, I informed MS Millbrook that routine inspections might temporarily affect service. That's standard procedure and fully within the terms of the contract her HOA signed." He pulled out a notepad. "She claims you specifically targeted her home and used the threat of service interruption to try to extort concessions from her in an ongoing dispute." "That's simply not true," I said firmly. "And I have the inspection schedule and communication records to prove it." The deputy regarded me skeptically. "Ms. Millbrook also mentioned you might be experiencing some adjustment difficulties. She expressed concern about your state of mind." There it was. Just as I'd suspected. "Deputy Walsh, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly fine. What you're seeing is a calculated attempt to discredit me because I've discovered financial irregularities in the HOA that Ms. Millbrook runs, as well as her connections to a development project that stands to make a lot of money if certain properties, including mine, can be acquired." Walsh's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, interest, perhaps. "That's quite an accusation, Mr. Quinn." "I have documentation," I replied. "And I was planning to bring it to Sheriff Donner tomorrow." "The sheriff is away at a conference until next week," Walsh informed me. Convenient timing, I thought. "Then I'll wait for his return," I said. "In the meantime, I can assure you that no one's water will be cut off as a form of intimidation. Any service interruptions will be announced in advance and will be for legitimate inspection purposes only." Walsh nodded slowly. "I'll note your statement in my report. But Mr. Quinn, I should warn you that making unfounded accusations against MS Millbrook could potentially constitute defamation." "They're not unfounded," I replied evenly. "And truth is an absolute defense against defamation, deputy." After Walsh left, I returned to my computer and hit send on the email to the Pinecrest homeowners. Whatever Karen and Thornton had planned, they just lost the element of surprise. The community deserved to know what was happening behind the scenes of their HOA. As I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've made a serious mistake. Last chance to accept the offer before things get complicated." I didn't bother responding. Things were already complicated, and we all knew it. What I didn't know yet was just how dirty this fight was about to get. Morning broke with the sound of vehicles coming up my driveway, 3 of them, based on the engines I could hear. I'd slept fitfully, keeping my phone and a flashlight beside my bed, half expecting more late-night visitors. I pulled on jeans and a t-shirt and peered out my bedroom window. A county water department truck, a news van from the local TV station, and Karen Millbrook's Mercedes were parked in a neat row. I grabbed my coffee and headed outside to face whatever new attack they'd orchestrated. Karen stood with a man in a county uniform and a young woman holding a microphone, her cameraman adjusting equipment beside her. All three turned as my door opened. "Mr. Quinn!" the reporter called out, moving toward me. "Stephanie Gray from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story on concerns about the Evergreen Lake Water Company's change in ownership. Residents are worried about service interruptions and quality issues. Care to comment?" I smiled pleasantly, determined not to give them the angry veteran footage they were likely hoping for. "Good morning, Ms. Gray. I'd be happy to comment. The Evergreen Lake Water Company is undergoing standard inspections following the change in ownership, with zero planned service interruptions for residential customers. Water quality remains our top priority, and all testing shows we exceed state standards." Karen stepped forward. "That's not what you told me yesterday. You explicitly threatened to shut off water to my home as leverage in our dispute." The county water official looked concerned. "Is that true, Mr. Quinn? Because withholding essential services as a form of coercion would be a violation of state utility regulations." "It's not true," I replied calmly. "I explained to Ms. Millbrook that routine inspections might temporarily affect service in some areas. I never threatened to target her home specifically or to use water access as leverage." I turned to the reporter. "What Ms. Millbrook isn't mentioning is her personal financial interest in a development project that stands to make millions if certain properties around the lake, including mine, can be acquired. Nor is she mentioning the pattern of selective HOA enforcement she's used to pressure those same homeowners." The reporter's eyes widened slightly. Clearly, this wasn't the story she'd been primed for. "That's absurd," Karen snapped. "This is exactly the kind of paranoid accusation I was warning you about. Mr. Quinn is a veteran with a history of—" She paused, suddenly seeming to remember the camera. "A history of what, Ms. Millbrook?" I prompted. She backpedaled. Of disputing legitimate HOA regulations." "Interesting," I said. "For a moment I thought you were about to mention my private medical records, the ones someone tried to illegally access from the VA yesterday." The county official looked uncomfortable now. "I'm just here to confirm that the water system is being properly maintained." "And it is," I assured him. "I'd be happy to show you the maintenance logs and the water quality test results from yesterday. In fact, they show improvement in several areas compared to the previous owner's results." The reporter turned to Karen. "Ms. Millbrook, could you respond to Mr. Quinn's accusation about your connection to a development project targeting these properties?" Karen's composure slipped momentarily. "I have no official connection to any development project. My husband's investment firm may have some minor involvement, but that has nothing to do with HOA enforcement actions." "Then you won't mind if I share these with Ms. Gray?" I asked, pulling a folder from under my arm. Copies of the HOA violation notices I'd compiled, showing the clear pattern of enforcement against properties in Lakeside's acquisition zone. Before Karen could respond, more vehicles appeared on the road, several cars turning into my driveway. Neighbors. They stepped out, walking toward our impromptu gathering with purposeful strides. "What's this?" Karen demanded. Sarah Walker approached first. "We got Cole's email last night, with the documents showing what you've been doing, Karen. And we've brought our own HOA violation notices to compare," added Stanley Green, a retired accountant from down the road. "Funny how we all seem to have been targeted right after declining offers from Lakeside Ventures." The reporter was now fully engaged, her cameraman capturing the growing crowd of homeowners converging on my property, many waving papers, violation notices, emails, water bills. Karen looked around, suddenly finding herself surrounded by the very people she'd been bullying for years. The county official took a step back, clearly not wanting to be associated with whatever was unfolding. "This is a private HOA matter," Karen insisted, her voice rising. "You're all in violation of the covenants you signed." "Actually," Stanley said, stepping forward with a document of his own, "I've reviewed the HOA bylaws. They require board approval for all enforcement actions, and they mandate financial transparency. We've seen no evidence of either." The reporter turned back to her camera. "It seems what began as a story about water service concerns has revealed potential irregularities in the Pinecrest Homeowners Association's operations. Homeowners are alleging targeted enforcement and possible financial mismanagement by HOA President Karen Millbrook." Karen's face had gone from composed to panicked. She fumbled for her phone. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling my attorney." "While you're at it," I suggested, "you might want to call Mr. Thornton at Lakeside Ventures. I'm sure he'd be interested to know that his quiet acquisition plan isn't so quiet anymore." As Karen retreated to her car, phone pressed to her ear, the neighbors closed around me, sharing stories of HOA harassment that lined up precisely with Lakeside's property interests. The reporter moved through the crowd, collecting testimonials while the county water official awkwardly excused himself, promising to return for a proper inspection at a more convenient time. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to find Sarah. "You started something big here," she said quietly. "Are you ready for what comes next?" "I'd better be," I replied. "Because I don't think Karen or Lakeside is going to back down easily." Sarah nodded toward the road, where another vehicle was approaching, a black SUV with tinted windows. Maxwell Thornton had arrived to manage the situation personally. "Looks like we're about to find out," she murmured. The next few hours were a blur of confrontations, revelations, and unexpected alliances. Thornton had attempted to disperse the crowd with a combination of charm and veiled threats, suggesting that property values would plummet if plans for the luxury resort fell through. Instead, he found himself facing a united front of homeowners demanding answers about Lakeside's methods and Karen's role in targeting specific properties. By mid-afternoon, 3 things had happened that changed the entire dynamic. First, the Channel 7 news crew had enough material for not just one segment, but a potential investigative series on HOA overreach and developer tactics. Second, 2 county commissioners had arrived, drawn by calls from constituents, and were visibly uncomfortable with the public scrutiny of their connections to Lakeside Ventures. Third, and most significantly, Marcus had come through with documents showing that Lakeside's funding included money from sources that would trigger a federal review under foreign investment regulations, a review they had apparently circumvented through their complex shell company structure. I stood on my porch, watching as the impromptu gathering gradually dispersed. Thornton had left an hour earlier, tight-lipped and furious after pulling Karen into his SUV for what appeared to be a tense conversation. The county commissioners had made vague promises of looking into these concerns before making hasty exits. Only a few neighbors remained, including Sarah and Stanley, who had taken on the role of organizing the homeowners' response. "What do you think they'll do next?" Sarah asked, joining me at the porch railing. "Counterattack," I replied without hesitation. "They've got too much money invested in this project to walk away. And we've just publicly embarrassed them." Stanley nodded grimly. "Karen controls the HOA bank accounts. We should expect those funds to be moved or depleted." "Already handled," I assured him. "I spoke with the bank manager this morning, not Karen's cousin, the regional director. The accounts are temporarily frozen pending an audit." Sarah looked impressed. "You've been busy." "Military training," I said with a shrug. "Anticipate your enemy's moves and cut them off before they can execute." As we spoke, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "They're running scared. Source says Thornton on phone with investors all afternoon. Damage control." I showed the message to Sarah and Stanley. "So what's our next move?" Stanley asked. Before I could answer, a sheriff's department SUV pulled into the driveway, the actual sheriff this time, not a deputy. Sheriff Donner stepped out, looking tired and annoyed. "I thought you were at a conference," I called out as he approached. "I was. Got called back when the county commission chair started getting nervous about what's happening here." He climbed the porch steps with a heavy tread. "Want to tell me why my quiet county is suddenly buzzing about HOA fraud, developer conspiracies, and water rights?" I gestured to a chair. "It's a long story, Sheriff." "I've got time," he replied, settling in. "And Cole? Make it good, because I've got the county prosecutor waiting on a call back." For the next hour, I laid out everything: the pattern of HOA violations targeting specific properties, Karen's connection to Lakeside Ventures through her husband, the attempted access of my medical records, and the financial discrepancies in the HOA accounts. Stanley provided additional context about the HOA bylaws violations, while Sarah described the pattern of pressure tactics against homeowners who had declined to sell to Lakeside. Sheriff Donner listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When we finished, he sat back and sighed deeply. "You realize you're accusing some politically connected people of pretty serious misconduct," he said finally. "The kind that could be criminal if proven." "I know," I acknowledged. "But the evidence is solid." He tapped his notebook thoughtfully. "Solid enough for a warrant, maybe. Not sure yet about charges." He stood up. "I'll need copies of everything you have. And I mean everything, Cole. If we're going this route, it has to be by the book." I nodded. "You'll have it all within the hour." As the sheriff headed back to his vehicle, he turned. "One more thing. Watch yourself. People with money and connections don't like being cornered. And right now, you've got Thornton and Karen both feeling pretty cornered." After he left, Sarah looked at me with concern. "He's right, you know. They'll come after you personally next." "Probably," I agreed. "But I've faced worse odds in Afghanistan." Stanley cleared his throat. "Not to be a pessimist, but you had the U.S. military backing you up in Afghanistan. Here you've got us." I smiled. "Don't underestimate the power of an angry neighborhood, Stanley." As evening approached, Sarah and Stanley finally left, promising to coordinate with other homeowners about next steps. I spent an hour organizing digital copies of all my evidence to send to Sheriff Donner, then stepped outside to watch the sunset over the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the oranges and purples of the fading day. This view, this peace, was what I'd fought for overseas, and what I'd been seeking when I bought this cabin. The irony that I was now in another kind of battle wasn't lost on me. My phone rang, unknown number again. "Quinn," I answered. "Mr. Quinn, this is Maxwell Thornton." His voice was controlled, professional. "I think it's time we had a private conversation." I watched a heron glide across the lake, landing gracefully on the opposite shore. "I'm not sure we have anything to discuss, Mr. Thornton." "I believe we do," he replied. "Without cameras, neighbors, or Karen Millbrook's drama. Just two businessmen finding a reasonable solution." "And what solution did you have in mind?" "One that acknowledges reality," he said. "Lakeside's project will proceed in some form. The economic benefits are too significant for the county to reject it entirely. The question is whether you want to be fairly compensated as part of that process, or whether you prefer a prolonged, costly legal battle." I considered his words. "When and where?" "Tonight. The Lakeview Inn, private dining room. 8 o'clock. "I'll be there," I said after a moment. "But just so we're clear, I'll be recording the conversation." There was a pause. "That won't be necessary. We'll be speaking hypothetically, of course." "Of course," I echoed. "But I'll still be recording. Take it or leave it." Another pause. "Fine. 8 o'clock. After hanging up, I immediately called Marcus and filled him in. "It's a trap," he said flatly. "He's going to try to get you to say something incriminating." "I know," I agreed. "That's why I want you there too, sitting at the bar. If anything happens, you'll be my witness." "And your backup," Marcus added. "I don't trust these people, Cole. At all." As I prepared to meet Thornton, I considered my options carefully. This could be an opportunity to resolve the situation without further escalation, or it could be a setup designed to discredit me or worse. Either way, I needed to be prepared. I arrived at the Lakeview in 15 minutes early, noting Thornton's black SUV already in the parking lot. Marcus had texted that he was inside at the bar, positioned with a clear view of the private dining room entrance. The hostess led me to a secluded room at the back of the restaurant, where Thornton sat alone at a table with 2 place settings and a bottle of expensive-looking whiskey already open. "Mr. Quinn," he greeted, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming. Drink?" "I'll pass," I said, taking a seat across from him. I placed my phone on the table, voice recorder app visibly running. Thornton eyed it with distaste but made no comment. "I admire directness, so I'll be direct. You've caused a significant complication for our project." "Your project was already complicated by its methods," I replied. "Pressuring homeowners through HOA harassment isn't exactly ethical business practice." He waved a dismissive hand. Karen's tactics were her own. Overzealous, perhaps, but effective for our purposes. "So you admit Lakeside was using the HOA to pressure homeowners to sell?" Thornton smiled thinly. "I admit nothing of the sort. I'm merely acknowledging that Karen's actions, whatever their motivation, created opportunities in the real estate market that we were positioned to capitalize on." "Semantic games," I observed. "Let's cut to it. What are you proposing?" He leaned forward. "A partnership. Lakeside still wants to develop a resort on Lake Evergreen, but we're flexible on the exact configuration. We need the water company for our infrastructure plans, and certain key properties for lake access. Your cabin is one of those properties. And we're prepared to offer you a significant stake in the development instead of a cash buyout. You sell us the water company and your property, and in return, you become a partner with a guaranteed annual return on investment. You'd have the capital to buy an even better property elsewhere, plus ongoing income." I studied him. "Why would you make me a partner when you were ready to destroy me yesterday?" Thornton shrugged. "Business isn't personal, Mr. Quinn. You've demonstrated resources and resilience we didn't anticipate. Rather than fight you, we'd prefer to bring you into the fold." "And the other homeowners? The ones Karen has been harassing?" "We'll make fair offers," he replied. "Without the HOA pressure tactics." I sat back, considering his words. "And what about the foreign investment you've been concealing through shell companies? The ones that would trigger a federal review?" Thornton's expression hardened momentarily before he recovered his composure. "I'm not sure what you think you know about our financing structure, but I can assure you everything is in full compliance with applicable regulations." "My sources suggest otherwise," I said. "And those sources have already shared their concerns with the appropriate authorities." "Sources can be mistaken," Thornton replied coolly. "Or discredited." The threat was subtle but clear. "Let me be equally direct," I said, leaning forward. "I'm not interested in a partnership with Lakeside. I bought my cabin to live in it, not to flip it for a profit. I bought the water company to protect it from being exploited by developers who might prioritize profit over conservation." Thornton's pleasant facade began to slip. "You're making a serious miscalculation, Quinn. This project has support at levels you can't fight: County Commission, State Economic Development Board. One stubborn veteran won't stop progress." "Maybe not," I acknowledged. "But a stubborn veteran with evidence of corruption, illegal financing, and criminal conspiracy might cause enough delays and public relations problems to make your investors nervous." He stared at me, calculation visible in his eyes. "Name your price." "Everyone has one." I stood up. "Not everyone, Mr. Thornton. Some of us actually meant it when we swore to defend something larger than ourselves." As I reached for my phone, Thornton spoke again, his voice lower. "Your military record is impressive, Quinn. Distinguished service. Combat decorations. But every soldier has moments they'd rather keep private. Decisions made under pressure. Split-second choices that don't look good in the cold light of civilian review. I froze. What are you implying? Nothing specific, he said with false innocence. Just that war is messy. Documentation is imperfect. Memories differ among witnesses. It would be unfortunate if questions arose about certain incidents in your combat history just as you're positioning yourself as a community defender. My blood ran cold. He was threatening to fabricate war crime allegations, the kind of claims that would devastate my reputation regardless of their truth. That recording will show you attempting to blackmail a veteran with threatened defamation, I said, nodding toward my phone. I've threatened nothing, Thornton replied smoothly. I've merely observed that history is often complicated. No judge would find otherwise. He stood, straightening his jacket. Think about my offer, Quinn. It's the only one you'll get. As he walked past me toward the door, he added quietly. Oh, and I wouldn't count on Sheriff Donner's support much longer. His re-election campaign just received a significant donation from a local business consortium. Amazing how that works. He left me standing there, the recorder still running, capturing nothing but my own tense breathing and the distant sounds of the restaurant beyond the closed door. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Thornton just left. You okay? I wasn't sure how to answer that. The threat had been expertly crafted, nothing explicitly illegal on the recording, but the message was unmistakable. They would fabricate allegations about my military service if I continued to stand in their way. But Thornton had miscalculated in one critical way. He'd assumed I was fighting to protect just my property. In reality, I was fighting because it was the right thing to do, the same reason I joined the military in the first place. And threats only strengthened my resolve. I texted Marcus back. I'm fine. But we need to accelerate our timeline. They're getting desperate. The next morning dawned with a clarity that matched my newfound determination. If Thornton wanted to escalate, I would meet him move for move. But first, I needed to secure my position. I called an emergency meeting of concerned Pinecrest homeowners at my cabin. By 10 a.m., my living room was filled with neighbors, many of whom I'd barely known before this conflict began. Sarah and Stanley had organized the gathering, ensuring that representatives from across the development were present. Thanks for coming, I began, standing before them. Last night, Maxwell Thornton threatened to fabricate allegations about my military service if I continued to oppose Lakeside's development plans. Murmurs of outrage rippled through the room. He also implied that Sheriff Donner's support has been compromised through campaign donations. I continued. Whether that's true remains to be seen, but we need to operate under the assumption that official channels may not be reliable. Stanley raised his hand. What about the county prosecutor? Sheriff Donner was supposed to take our evidence to her. I've heard nothing back, I replied. Which could mean they're building a case carefully, or it could mean the case is being slow-walked. Either way, we can't wait to find out. Sarah stood. So what do we do? I laid out my plan. First, we would form a legal entity, the Lake Evergreen Conservation Trust, and I would transfer ownership of the water company to this trust. The homeowners present would become its board members, ensuring that no single person, including me, could be pressured or bought off. Second, we would file a civil RICO suit against Lakeside Ventures, Karen Millbrook, and any county officials found to be complicit in the scheme. Marcus had connected us with a law firm specializing in such cases, working on contingency. Third, and most immediately, we would call for an emergency HOA meeting to remove Karen from her position and elect an interim board. They'll fight all of this, warned an older gentleman from the back of the room. And they have deep pockets. They will, I agreed. But consider this. Lakeside's entire business model depends on acquiring properties quietly, with minimal public scrutiny or opposition. We've already disrupted that model. Their investors don't want a prolonged, public legal battle that might trigger regulatory investigations. What about Thornton's threats against you personally? Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. That's being handled separately, I assured her, though in truth, I was still working on that particular problem. The important thing is to secure the water company and begin legal proceedings before they can make any more moves. The meeting continued for another hour as we worked through the details. By noon, everyone had signed the necessary paperwork to create the trust, and Stanley had drafted the petition for an emergency HOA meeting, which had already gathered enough signatures to force the issue under the bylaws. As the neighbors departed, Sarah lingered behind. You didn't really answer my question about Thornton's threats, she pointed out. What are you doing to protect yourself? I hesitated, then decided she deserved honesty. I've sent copies of the recording to my attorney, to Marcus, and to several other trusted contacts with instructions to release it publicly if anything happens to me. I've also documented everything about my military service that could potentially be twisted or misrepresented. Sarah's expression grew troubled. Do you really think they'd go that far? I think Thornton has too much money invested in this project to walk away easily, I replied. And people who are accustomed to getting their way can become unpredictable when they're thwarted. You're not exactly backing down, she observed with a small smile. Not in my nature, I admitted. Besides, I've dealt with worse than real estate developers. After Sarah left, I sat alone on my porch, watching the lake and waiting for the inevitable response to our morning's work. It came sooner than I expected, in the form of a county truck pulling into my driveway. The seal on the door read, County Building Inspector. A middle-aged man in a county uniform stepped out, carrying a clipboard and a digital camera. Cole Quinn? He called as he approached. That's me, I replied, standing to meet him at the bottom of the porch steps. Frank Morris, County Building Department. We've received a complaint about unpermitted structural modifications to this property. Of course. If they couldn't buy me out or scare me off, they'd try to drown me in regulatory problems. All my renovations have permits, I informed him. I'm a licensed contractor. I know the requirements. Morris consulted his clipboard. Complaint specifically mentions load-bearing wall removal, non-compliant electrical work, and septic system modifications without inspection. None of which I had done. Happy to show you around, I offered. You'll find everything in order, with permits posted as required. Morris seemed slightly taken aback by my cooperation. Yes, that would be helpful. I led him through a thorough inspection of the cabin, pointing out the permits for each phase of renovation and explaining the work that had been done. As a fellow professional in the building trades, Morris quickly recognized that the complaints were baseless. Well, Mr. Quinn, I don't see any violations here, he admitted as we finished the tour. Your permits are in order, and the work is up to code. He hesitated. Between us, this isn't the first complaint we've received about properties in Pinecrest lately. All from the same source, all equally unfounded. Let me guess, I said. Karen Millbrook? He didn't confirm or deny, but his expression told me I was right. Just doing my job, he said, making a final note on his clipboard. I'll file my report showing no violations found. As he turned to leave, I asked, Mr. Morris, would you be willing to provide a statement about these unfounded complaints if needed? For a potential legal proceeding? He paused. Official department records would show my findings. Beyond that, I'd need to consult with county legal counsel. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. I'd take it. After the building inspector left, I received a text from Stanley. Emergency HOA meeting scheduled for 7 p.m. tomorrow at the community center. Karen is furious. I smiled. The wheels were in motion. But my satisfaction was short-lived as another vehicle approached, a black sedan I didn't recognize. It parked behind my truck, and a man in a dark suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. Mr. Quinn? He called. I'm Howard Bennett, attorney for Lakeside Ventures. He held out an envelope. You're being served with a cease and desist order regarding defamatory statements made about my client, as well as a temporary restraining order prohibiting you from interfering with Lakeside's business operations. I accepted the envelope without opening it. Interfering with business operations? By owning my own property and a legally acquired water company? Bennett's expression remained professionally neutral. The specifics are detailed in the order. I'd advise you to review it with your attorney promptly. As he returned to his car, my phone rang. Marcus. They've filed emergency injunctions against you in county court, he said without preamble. Judge Wilson granted them without a hearing. He's Karen's husband's golfing buddy. I just got served, I confirmed, looking at the envelope in my hand. Don't panic, Marcus advised. Our attorney says this is standard intimidation tactics. The injunctions are likely overbroad and won't stand up to challenge. But in the meantime, I'm legally restricted from speaking about Lakeside or taking any action with the water company. I finished for him. Basically, yes. Until we can get a hearing to contest the orders. I watched Bennett's sedan disappear down my driveway. How long will that take? In a normal court, days. With Judge Wilson. Marcus hesitated. Could be weeks. Weeks we didn't have. Thornton was trying to run out the clock, keeping me legally constrained while they pursued other angles. The trust paperwork, I said suddenly. Has it been filed yet? First thing this morning, Marcus confirmed. You no longer own the water company as an individual. The Lake Evergreen Conservation Trust does. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. So the restraining order against me personally doesn't affect the trust's operations. Technically correct, Marcus agreed cautiously. But be careful, Cole. They'll argue you're using the trust as an alter ego to circumvent the court order. Let them argue, I replied. Meanwhile, the trust's board members, all Pinecrest homeowners with no restraining orders against them, can continue opposing Lakeside's plans. It was a legal distinction that might not hold up under scrutiny, but it would buy us time to gather more evidence, time to mobilize community opposition, time to secure the support we needed. As night fell over Lake Evergreen, I studied the legal documents Bennett had delivered. They were as overreaching as Marcus had suggested, prohibiting me from making any false or misleading statements about Lakeside Ventures, with no specification of what would qualify as false or misleading, and barring me from taking any action that might impede Lakeside's legitimate business interests. Regarding Lake Evergreen development plans, the vagueness was deliberate. With such broad prohibitions, almost anything I did could be construed as a violation, potentially leading to contempt charges. Judge Wilson had handed Thornton a powerful tool to silence me while creating the appearance of due process. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Just heard about the restraining order. Emergency meeting at Stanley's house, 9 p.m. Can you come? I texted back. Probably not a good idea. Better if I stay clear for now. You and Stanley handle it. Sarah responded immediately. Understood. We'll keep fighting. Stay safe. I set my phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened lake. The lights of homes around the shore reflected on the water's surface, creating a mirror image of the community Thornton and Karen were trying to transform for their own profit. A sudden movement near the tree line caught my eye, a flash of light, quickly extinguished. I stepped away from the window instinctively, military training kicking in. Someone was out there, watching my cabin. I moved through the house, turning off lights as I went, making it appear as though I was going to bed. Instead, I slipped out the back door and circled around through the woods, using the darkness and my knowledge of the terrain to approach the spot where I'd seen the light. As I drew closer, I could make out a figure crouched at the edge of my property, a camera with a long lens on a tripod before him. He was focused on my cabin, apparently waiting for me to reappear in the windows. I approached silently from behind. Looking for something? The man jumped, nearly knocking over his equipment. He was young, maybe mid-20s, dressed in dark clothing. What the hell, man? He gasped. You scared the shit out of me. That's my line, I replied calmly. Considering you're trespassing on my property and photographing my home. He began hastily packing up his gear. I'm just doing my job, okay? I'm a freelance photographer. Who hired you? Client confidentiality, he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Let me guess. Tall guy, expensive suit, black SUV? Or maybe a middle-aged woman with highlighted hair and a Mercedes? The photographer said nothing, but his expression confirmed my suspicions. What exactly were you hoping to capture? I pressed. He shrugged uncomfortably. They said you might have visitors. People coming and going. They wanted documentation. They were looking for evidence that I was violating the restraining order by meeting with other homeowners. Setting me up for a contempt charge. Here's what's going to happen, I said, keeping my voice steady. You're going to leave my property now. If I see you or any other photographer around here again, I'll file trespassing charges immediately. He nodded rapidly, gathering the last of his equipment. Look, man, it's nothing personal. Just a paying gig. One more thing, I added as he prepared to leave. Whoever hired you is involved in some questionable activities that are already under investigation. Might want to be careful about what kind of work you accept from them in the future. After the photographer disappeared into the night, I returned to my cabin and called Marcus, bringing him up to speed on this latest development. They're getting desperate, he observed. Setting up surveillance to catch you in a technical violation is pretty extreme. Desperate people make mistakes, I replied. We just need to be ready to capitalize on those mistakes when they happen. Speaking of which, Marcus said, his voice taking on a note of excitement, I might have something. A former Lakeside employee contacted me after seeing the news coverage. Says he has documents showing they falsified environmental impact statements on their last 2 projects. It was the first real break we'd had. Can we trust him? He seems legitimate. Left on bad terms after raising concerns internally about contamination they were covering up. Has documentation to back his claims. Set up a meeting, I said. But not at my place. They're watching too closely. Already arranged, Marcus assured me. Tomorrow, noon, at my hotel in the city. You should be there, Cole. He specifically asked to speak with you. I hesitated, considering the restraining order. I'm not supposed to take any action that impedes Lakeside's business interests. Meeting someone for lunch isn't taking action, Marcus argued. And hearing information isn't the same as using it. We can worry about how to legally leverage what he tells us after we know what we're dealing with. He had a point. And with Thornton and Karen escalating their tactics, we needed every advantage we could get. I'll be there, I decided. Text me the details. As I ended the call, a sense of foreboding settled over me. Thornton had shown he was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to remove obstacles to his development. The photographer tonight was likely just the beginning. Whatever came next would be calculated to either force my compliance or create grounds for legal action against me. But 2 could play at that game. And while Thornton had money and connections, I had something perhaps more valuable in this fight: the truth, and a community increasingly willing to stand up for it. I arrived at Marcus's hotel at 11:45 the next day, having taken a circuitous route to ensure I wasn't followed. The hotel was in the city about an hour from Lake Evergreen, far enough from Thornton's immediate sphere of influence to feel marginally safer. Marcus met me in the lobby. Room 412. Our guest is already there. As we rode the elevator, Marcus filled me in on what he'd learned. His name is Daniel Foster. He was an environmental compliance officer for Lakeside for 3 years. Left about 8 months ago after the Lake Morrison project in Wisconsin. What exactly does he have? I asked. Internal reports showing contamination from construction runoff that Lakeside covered up. Emails discussing how to manage environmental assessments. And something about water rights that he thinks will specifically interest you. The elevator doors opened, and we made our way down the hallway. Marcus knocked on room 412, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal a nervous-looking man in his 30s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Foster? I'm Marcus Davis." We spoke on the phone. "This is Cole Quinn." Foster ushered us in quickly, checking the hallway before closing the door. The room was a standard hotel double, with papers spread across one of the beds and a laptop open on the desk. "Thank you for coming," Foster said, his voice tight with anxiety. "I've been following what's happening at Lake Evergreen." It's the same playbook they used at Lake Morrison and Clearwater Basin before that. What exactly is their playbook? I asked. Foster gestured to the papers on the bed. Acquire key properties through whatever means necessary. Submit environmental impact statements that drastically understate the actual effects of construction and increased usage. Begin development before all permits are properly in place, creating a fait accompli that regulators are reluctant to halt once millions have been invested. He picked up a folder. But the water situation is what you need to understand. At both previous sites, Lakeside's development led to significant degradation of water quality in the surrounding area. Increased sediment, chemical runoff from landscaping, overloaded septic systems. And they covered this up? Marcus prompted. Foster nodded vigorously. Falsified water quality reports. Pressured local officials to look the other way. Settled with affected homeowners using non-disclosure agreements to keep the problems quiet. He turned to me. Mr. Quinn, when I heard you had purchased the water company, I realized you were in a unique position to prevent what happened at the other lakes. That's why I came forward. I studied the man before me. His nervousness seemed genuine, as did his concern. But something felt off. Why didn't you report these violations to state environmental authorities when you left Lakeside? I asked. Foster's gaze dropped. I signed an NDA as part of my severance. And to be honest, I was afraid. Thornton made it clear that whistleblowers would regret coming forward. What changed? Marcus asked. Seeing the news about Lake Evergreen. Realizing they're doing it again. Foster looked up, his expression firming. And I've secured a new position out of state. I'm leaving next week. I decided I couldn't remain silent anymore. He handed me a USB drive. Everything's on here. Reports, emails, photos of construction sites showing environmental damage, and their internal analysis of Lake Evergreen's water system, which they commissioned months before approaching the previous owner about selling. I turned the drive over in my hand, considering its implications. If legitimate, it could provide the evidence we needed to trigger state and possibly federal environmental investigations. Why didn't Lakeside just continue with their plan to buy the water company from the previous owner? I asked. Why let it go to me? Foster looked surprised by the question. They didn't let it go. Their plan was to acquire it quietly through a shell company, but apparently someone tipped you off about the sale before they could complete the transaction. I exchanged glances with Marcus. No one had tipped me off. I'd approached the previous owner directly after learning the water company was potentially for sale from a casual comment at the local hardware store. Mr. Foster, I said carefully, do you have any direct evidence of Lakeside's plans specifically for Lake Evergreen? Something that shows their intent regarding the properties they're trying to acquire? He hesitated. There's a development prospectus on the drive. Internal document for investors. Shows the planned resort layout, projected environmental impact, the real numbers, not the ones they plan to submit for permits, and a list of priority acquisition targets with your property highlighted. It was exactly what we needed, if it was authentic. May I? Marcus gestured to the laptop. Foster nodded, and Marcus inserted the USB drive. As files began populating the screen, Foster continued explaining various documents, pointing out particularly damning emails and reports. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Sarah. Where are you? Karen just showed up at the county courthouse with Sheriff Donner. They're claiming you violated the restraining order. My blood ran cold. How could they know where I was? I hadn't told anyone except Marcus about this meeting. Unless. I looked up at Foster, who was leaning over Marcus's shoulder, pointing out something on the screen. Was this entire meeting a setup? A way to get me to violate the restraining order by impeding Lakeside's business interests through meeting with a former employee? Before I could decide how to proceed, there was a sharp knock at the door. Foster jumped, looking alarmed. Are you expecting someone? Marcus asked him. Foster shook his head, his eyes wide. The knock came again, more insistent. Mr. Foster? This is hotel security. We have an urgent message for you. Marcus and I exchanged looks. Something was definitely wrong. Check first, I murmured to Foster, who nodded and approached the door cautiously. He peered through the peephole, then turned back to us, his face pale. It's not hotel security. It's two men I don't recognize. The knocking came a third time, louder. Mr. Foster, please open the door. It's regarding your car in the parking garage. I moved silently to the window, scanning the street below. A police cruiser was parked at the hotel entrance, not from the county where Lake Evergreen was located, but from the city police department. My phone buzzed again with another text from Sarah. Sheriff Donner just left the courthouse with what looks like a warrant. Call me. The pieces clicked into place. This was indeed a setup, but more elaborate than I'd initially suspected. Foster might or might not be working with Thornton, but someone had definitely arranged for law enforcement to catch me in violation of the restraining order. We need to leave, I said quietly to Marcus. Now. Marcus quickly removed the USB drive and pocketed it. How? There at the door. I pointed to the adjoining room door. Is that room occupied? Foster shook his head. I don't think so. It's been quiet. The knocking had turned to pounding now. Mr. Foster, open this door immediately or we'll have to call for assistance. I moved to the adjoining door and found it unlocked from our side. Opening it cautiously, I confirmed the next room was indeed empty. This way. As Marcus and I slipped through, Foster hesitated. What about me? That's up to you, I replied honestly. But I think you need to ask yourself why hotel security would bring police for a car issue, and how they knew you had visitors. Understanding dawned in Foster's eyes. You think I'm part of a setup? Are you? He looked genuinely distressed. No. I came here to help. But Thornton has resources. He could have tracked me somehow. The pounding on the door grew more insistent. Make your own choice, I told him. But we're leaving. Marcus and I moved through the adjoining room and into the hallway, walking calmly toward the stairwell at the opposite end from room 412. As we rounded the corner, we heard a commotion behind us, Foster's door being opened, raised voices. We descended the stairs quickly but without running, emerging into the hotel's lower lobby near the conference rooms. A service exit led to the side parking lot, away from the main entrance where the police cruiser waited. My car's in the main garage, Marcus said as we stepped outside. We'll get it later, I replied. Right now, we need to put distance between us and whatever's happening up there. We walked briskly to a coffee shop across the street, taking a table near the back with a view of the hotel. Within minutes, we saw Foster being escorted out the main entrance by two men in suits and a uniformed police officer. They're detaining him, Marcus observed. But why? What's the actual charge? Maybe none, I suggested. Maybe just holding him long enough to search the room, find evidence we were there, and report back to Thornton or Karen. Marcus took out his phone. I'm calling our attorney. This has gone beyond harassment to potential entrapment. While Marcus made his call, I texted Sarah. I'm safe. We'll call soon. What exactly is Sheriff Donner claiming? Her response came quickly. That you've been contacting Lakeside employees to interfere with their business, in violation of the restraining order. Karen claims to have proof. Foster. He must have been working with them all along, or been compromised without our knowledge. What about the warrant? I texted back. Not sure. They went into the judge's chambers. Karen came out looking smug. I relayed this information to Marcus as he ended his call with the attorney. She says we need to document everything about this meeting, why we were there, what Foster told us, anything that might explain why they're so desperate to catch you violating the order. The USB drive, I said, nodding toward Marcus's pocket. We need to check what's actually on it. It could be genuine evidence, or it could be files planted to further incriminate me. Marcus hesitated. Using it could be seen as acting on information obtained in violation of the restraining order. We can't use it legally yet. I agreed. But we need to know what we're dealing with. Knowledge is an action. After ensuring we weren't being observed, Marcus carefully inserted the drive into his laptop. The files appeared as Foster had described: internal reports, emails, photographs, and the investment prospectus for Lake Evergreen. This looks legitimate, Marcus murmured as we skimmed through the documents. If it's fabricated, it's extremely thorough. The prospectus was particularly damning, a detailed plan for transforming the Lake Evergreen shoreline into an exclusive resort, complete with projections showing massive increases in boat traffic, waste production, and water usage. The environmental impact assessment prepared for investors was drastically different from the one mentioned as being prepared for regulatory submission. Most tellingly, there was a section titled Acquisition Strategy that explicitly mentioned using local governance structures to incentivize property sales in target zones. They documented their own conspiracy, I said in disbelief. Marcus nodded grimly. Arrogance. They never expected these internal documents to see the light of day. My phone rang. Sarah? Cole, where are you? She demanded when I answered. Safe for now, I replied. What's happening there? Sheriff Donner and 2 deputies just left for your cabin with a search warrant. Karen's telling everyone who will listen that you've been meeting with Lakeside employees to sabotage their business, in direct violation of the court order. That's not what happened, I said firmly. The person we met was a former employee who reached out with concerns about Lakeside's environmental practices. And how did they even know about the meeting? I don't know, Sarah admitted. But Cole, this is escalating quickly. The emergency HOA meeting is still on for tonight. You should stay away. They're clearly trying to catch you doing something they can use against you. I agreed, thanking her for the warning before ending the call. We need a safe place to review these files thoroughly, Marcus said, ejecting the USB drive. And we need to figure out how they knew about this meeting. I nodded, my mind racing through options. I have a friend about an hour from here. Former military, completely uninvolved in any of this. We can lay low there while we figure out our next steps. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, my phone buzzed again, an email notification from an unfamiliar address. The subject line made my heart skip. Thought you should see this, DF. Daniel Foster. I opened the email cautiously. There was no message, just an audio file attachment. I downloaded it and pressed play, keeping the volume low. Foster's voice came through first, sounding nervous. Told you everything I know. I don't understand why. Then another voice, one I recognized as Maxwell Thornton. Mr. Foster, your cooperation has been noted. The funds will be transferred as agreed. Foster again. You said this was about recovering stolen company documents. You didn't say anything about setting up Quinn. Thornton. The specifics aren't your concern. You've been well compensated for your role. A third voice, female, Karen Millbrook. Is he recording this? Check his phone. The recording ended abruptly. Marcus and I exchanged looks of grim understanding. Foster had been working with them, willingly or unwillingly, but had apparently had a change of heart. He sent this right after they detained him. I observed, checking the timestamp. Must have managed to record their conversation and send it before they took his phone. This proves they're setting you up, Marcus said. Along with the USB data, We have enough to contest the restraining order and possibly file our own charges. If we can use any of it legally, I cautioned. The recording might have been obtained illegally, and the USB came through a meeting that they'll claim violated the restraining order. Marcus smiled thinly. That's why we have lawyers. In the meantime, let's get somewhere safe and figure out our next move. As we left the coffee shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Thornton had resources and connections we could only guess at. If he tracked Foster to this meeting, he might well be tracking us now. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear: the conflict over Lake Evergreen had moved beyond property rights and water access. It had become a battle of wills between those who would exploit the lake for profit and those of us determined to protect it for future generations. And I had no intention of backing down. The next 12 hours were a blur of strategic planning, legal consultations, and careful evidence review. From the safety of my friend's home outside the city, Marcus and I combed through every file on Foster's USB drive, documenting what we found and creating secure backups. Our attorney, Jessica Chen, joined us via video call, her expression growing increasingly concerned as we shared what we'd uncovered. This is compelling evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and environmental crimes, she acknowledged. But there's a procedural problem. You obtained it while potentially violating a restraining order. The restraining order is overly broad and was granted without due process, Marcus argued. It should never have been issued in the first place. Jessica nodded. I agree, and we're filing a motion to dissolve it on those grounds. But until a judge rules on that motion, you're still technically bound by its terms. So what can we do with this information? I asked. You personally should do nothing with it for now, she advised. But there's nothing preventing Marcus or other concerned citizens from taking appropriate legal action based on legitimately obtained information. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The recording Foster sent you is particularly problematic from an evidentiary standpoint. It was almost certainly obtained without consent of all parties, which makes its admissibility questionable. But it proves they're setting me up, I protested. It suggests that, yes. But courts have rules about how evidence can be obtained and used. That said, she smiled slightly, the existence of such a recording might be something Thornton and Karen would prefer to keep private, regardless of its admissibility in court. I understood her implication. The recording might not be usable in court, but the mere threat of its public release could provide leverage. What about the emergency HOA meeting tonight? I asked, changing subjects. I obviously can't attend, but Sarah and Stanley are leading it. That meeting is crucial, Jessica emphasized. If they successfully remove Karen from her position, it undermines a key component of Thornton's strategy. The HOA has been his local enforcement mechanism. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Sheriff's deputies just left your cabin. They took your computer and some files. Emergency meeting still on for 7 p.m. I shared this update with Jessica and Marcus. They're looking for evidence that you violated the restraining order, Jessica said. But they're also likely trying to determine what you know and what evidence you might have against them. Fortunately, anything important was either with me or backed up securely, I assured her. As our strategy session continued, reports from Pinecrest homeowners kept arriving. Sheriff Donner had been seen meeting with Karen at the community center. Judge Wilson had cleared his afternoon docket, presumably to be available for any emergency motions Thornton's lawyers might file. The county commissioners had called an unusual Friday evening meeting with a vague agenda referencing water utility oversight. They're mobilizing on all fronts, Marcus observed grimly. So are we, I replied. Sarah reports that nearly every homeowner in Pinecrest plans to attend tonight's meeting. The community is fully engaged now. Jessica began outlining our legal strategy for the coming days: motions to dissolve the restraining order, potential counterclaims against Lakeside and Karen, and preparations for possible criminal complaints based on the evidence we'd gathered. As she spoke, I found myself thinking about the lake itself, the real victim in all of this. The clear waters that had drawn me to this place, the loons that called across the surface at dusk, the delicate balance of an ecosystem that had thrived for thousands of years before humans arrived with their development plans and profit motives. This wasn't just about my property rights or even about exposing corruption. It was about protecting something precious before it was irreparably damaged. Cole? Jessica's voice broke into my thoughts. Are you still with us? Sorry, yes. I refocused on the conversation. I was just thinking about what's really at stake here. She nodded, understanding. It's easy to get caught up in the legal battles and forget the underlying purpose. Speaking of which, I have news about the Lake Evergreen Conservation Trust. The papers have been processed and officially recorded. The trust now legally owns the water company, which means the restraining order against you personally doesn't affect the trust's ability to act. It was our first real victory, and it came at a crucial moment. So the trust can refuse to cooperate with Lakeside's development plans? Marcus clarified. Absolutely. Jessica confirmed. As a separate legal entity with its own board of directors, the trust can make decisions based on its charter, which specifically includes environmental protection as a primary purpose. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had a legal shield, documentary evidence of wrongdoing, and a community rallying to our cause. My phone buzzed again, another text from Sarah, this one containing a single photo. It showed Karen Millbrook engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with Maxwell Thornton in the parking lot of the Pinecrest Community Center. Their body language spoke volumes. Karen looked defensive, Thornton aggressive. Trouble in paradise? Marcus commented, looking over my shoulder at the image. Partners in crime often turn on each other when things start going sideways, Jessica observed. Karen may be realizing that she's the most exposed legally in all of this. As evening approached, we finalized our strategy. I would remain at my friend's house, well away from Pinecrest and any potential legal entanglements. Marcus would return to monitor the situation and coordinate with Sarah and Stanley. Jessica would prepare for a Monday morning legal offensive on multiple fronts. What about tonight's HOA meeting? I asked. Can we do anything to ensure it goes our way? Jessica considered. The meeting itself is perfectly legal under the HOA bylaws. As long as you personally stay away, there should be no legal issues. The homeowners have every right to vote to remove Karen from her position. But Karen won't go quietly, Marcus pointed out. She'll have procedural objections, delaying tactics, possibly even her own security to try to shut down the meeting. Which is why I've arranged for a court reporter to attend. Jessica revealed. An independent witness to document everything that happens. And I've drafted a formal resolution for the homeowners to adopt, legally removing Karen and appointing an interim board. As Marcus prepared to leave, he handed me a burner phone. Use this if you need to contact anyone. Your regular phone might be compromised. After he departed, I sat alone in my friend's spare bedroom, staring at the muted TV showing local news. Nothing about Lake Evergreen had made the broadcast yet, but I wondered how long that would last. If tonight's meeting turned contentious, or if the evidence we'd gathered became public, this local dispute could quickly become a larger story. My burner phone buzzed, a text from Marcus using our agreed-upon code names. Eagle in position. Meeting hall at capacity. Hawk circling with reinforcements. Eagle was Sarah. Hawk was Karen. Reinforcements likely meant Thornton's lawyers or security personnel. I paced the room, feeling helpless being so far from the action. Everything we'd worked for could succeed or fail in the next hour, and I could only wait for news. Another text came through. Hawk challenging meeting validity. Eagle holding firm. Vote proceeding. The minutes crawled by. I imagined the scene at the community center. Neighbors I'd come to know facing off against the woman who had bullied them for years, finally finding the courage to stand together. When the next update came, it wasn't a text but a call from Marcus. You're not going to believe this, he said, his voice charged with excitement. Karen just resigned. I sat down abruptly. What? Why? She got a call during the meeting, looked at her phone and went white as a sheet. Whispered something to her attorney, then stood up and announced she was resigning effective immediately for personal reasons. Then she just walked out. That makes no sense, I said. She was fighting us tooth and nail an hour ago. Something spooked her. Marcus agreed. Badly. The meeting's continuing. They're voting on the interim board now. Stanley's been nominated as temporary chair. After we hung up, I sat puzzling over this unexpected development. What could have happened to make Karen abandon her position so abruptly? Had Thornton cut her loose? Had some new evidence emerged that we weren't aware of? The local news caught my attention. A breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. County Commissioner James Wilson resigns amid allegations of bribery. Federal investigation underway. James Wilson. Judge Wilson's brother and Karen's connection on the county commission. I quickly searched for more information online and found a just-published article. The FBI had executed search warrants at Commissioner Wilson's home and office earlier that day. The investigation reportedly involved allegations of taking bribes to influence county contracting and zoning decisions. The pieces clicked into place. Karen had received news of Wilson's resignation during the meeting. She knew what it meant. The federal investigation wouldn't stop with Wilson. It would follow the money, and that trail would inevitably lead to Lakeside Ventures, to Thornton, and to her. My burner phone rang again. This time it was Sarah. "Cole, it's done," she said, breathless with excitement. "Karen resigned, we elected an interim board with Stanley as chair, and we've already passed resolutions to conduct a full audit of HOA finances and to officially support the Lake Evergreen Conservation Trust's mission." "That's fantastic," I replied, genuinely elated. "Have you heard about Commissioner Wilson?" "Just now," she confirmed. "Someone announced it right after the vote. The whole room is buzzing." "Cole, is this connected to our situation?" "I think it must be," I said. "And I suspect Karen made the same connection, which explains her sudden resignation." "What does this mean for Thornton and Lakeside?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But federal investigations have a way of uncovering things that local officials might have overlooked or been pressured to ignore. If Wilson was taking bribes to support Lakeside's development plans, then Thornton is implicated in federal crimes." Sarah finished for me. No wonder Karen jumped ship. After hanging up, I called Jessica to update her on these developments. "This changes everything," she said when I finished. "If there's a federal investigation into corruption related to Lakeside's projects, we need to make sure your evidence gets to the right people. Can we do that without violating the restraining order?" I asked. "The restraining order prevents you specifically from taking actions to impede Lakeside's business. It doesn't prevent federal agents from investigating potential crimes, nor does it prevent other citizens from providing information to those agents. So Marcus could share the USB contents with investigators?" "Precisely," she confirmed. "And I suspect that once the feds start looking at Lakeside, that overly broad restraining order will become the least of Thornton's concerns." For the first time since this conflict began, I felt the tide truly turning in our favor. What had started as a simple dispute over HOA violations had uncovered a web of corruption, environmental crimes, and now potentially federal offenses. As midnight approached, one final text came through from Marcus. "Thornton spotted leaving Lakeside offices with boxes. Security guard says FBI served warrants there too." I smiled grimly. Thornton was feeling the walls closing in. And judging by his actions, he knew exactly how damning the evidence against him might be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, at least, the lake had won a round against those who would exploit it. The next morning dawned with a sense of cautious optimism. I woke early, checking the burner phone to find updates from both Marcus and Sarah. The news was spreading rapidly through Pinecrest. Federal agents had been seen at Lakeside's offices until well past midnight, and rumors were circulating that several local officials had been served with subpoenas. Jessica called while I was having coffee. The restraining order has been dissolved, she announced without preamble. Judge Wilson recused himself from all matters related to Lakeside Ventures, citing appearance of potential conflict. The case was reassigned to Judge Harmon, who immediately reviewed our emergency motion and ruled in our favor. That's fantastic news, I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. So I'm free to return home? Completely. And Cole, there's more. The county prosecutor called me this morning. She wants to meet with you about potential criminal charges against Karen and possibly others involved in the HOA financial irregularities. It was all happening faster than I'd anticipated. With the federal investigation into Commissioner Wilson creating a domino effect, the local authorities who had been reluctant to act were now scrambling to show they were taking corruption seriously. What about Thornton? I asked. Jessica's tone grew more measured. That's complicated. The FBI isn't sharing details of their investigation, but my sources suggest it's focused on bribery of public officials related to multiple lakeside projects, not just Lake Evergreen. So he could still potentially move forward with the development? Theoretically, yes, but practically, it's unlikely. With Karen removed from the HOA, the water company secured in the trust, and now a federal investigation, Lakeside's investors are reportedly getting nervous. Several have already contacted their attorneys about withdrawing their funding. After finishing my call with Jessica, I thanked my friend for the safe haven and began the drive back to Lake Evergreen. The familiar roads leading to the lake felt different somehow, as if I were returning not just to my home but to a community that had transformed in my absence. As I approached my cabin, I noticed several vehicles parked along the road, neighbors who had spotted my truck and come to welcome me back. Sarah stood at the front of the group, a wide smile on her face. The conquering hero returns, she called as I stepped from my truck. I laughed, embarrassed by the reception. Hardly a hero. Just a stubborn veteran who doesn't like being bullied. Stanley stepped forward, extending his hand. On behalf of the new Pinecrest HOA board, I'd like to formally apologize for any harassment you experienced under the previous administration. And to thank you for standing up when the rest of us were too intimidated to do so. One by one, neighbors approached with similar sentiments, stories of Karen's bullying tactics, gratitude for the stand I'd taken, and updates on the rapidly evolving situation. FBI agents had interviewed several homeowners about offers from Lakeside Ventures. The county building inspector had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into selective enforcement. Sheriff Donner had issued a public statement distancing himself from both Karen and Commissioner Wilson. As the impromptu gathering dispersed, Sarah lingered behind. There's something you should see, she said, handing me a folder. Inside was a printed email chain, correspondence between Karen and Thornton dating back nearly 2 years, discussing their strategy for Lake Evergreen in explicit detail. The emails confirmed everything we'd suspected about their collaboration to pressure specific homeowners through HOA violations while Lakeside prepared to acquire properties at deflated prices. Where did you get this? I asked, stunned by the directness of the evidence. Karen's assistant at the HOA office, Sarah explained. Apparently Karen had her print these for a meeting with Thornton months ago. The assistant kept copies because she was uncomfortable with what she was seeing. When Karen resigned, she decided it was time to come forward. The final email in the chain was dated just 3 days earlier, a terse message from Thornton to Karen. Quinn's situation requires immediate resolution. Use all available leverage. Authorization confirmed for special compensation to necessary parties. Special compensation, I repeated. Bribes. Sarah nodded. The assistant has already spoken to the FBI. She says there are financial records at the HOA office showing payments to county officials labeled as consulting fees. As I absorbed this information, my phone rang, my regular phone, which I'd only just turned back on. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. Hello? Mr. Quinn? This is Agent Diane Rodriguez, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I understand you have information relevant to our investigation into Lakeside Ventures and certain county officials. I confirmed that I did, and we arranged a meeting for later that afternoon at the FBI's field office in the city. After hanging up, I turned to Sarah with a mix of disbelief and vindication. They're really going after them, I said. All thanks to you, she replied. I shook my head. Not just me. Every neighbor who spoke up, shared their story, provided evidence. We did this together. As Sarah left, I walked down to my dock and stood looking out over Lake Evergreen. The water sparkled in the midday sun, rippling gently in the breeze. A pair of loons floated near the far shore, their distinctive calls echoing across the surface. This was what we had been fighting for, not just our properties or our rights, but this, the lake itself, pristine and protected. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Thornton just announced indefinite postponement of Lake Evergreen Resort project. Investors pulling out. Victory lap? I smiled, typing back. Not yet. Still work to do. And there was. The federal investigation would likely take months. The restructuring of the HOA under Stanley's leadership was just beginning. The Lake Evergreen Conservation Trust needed to establish long-term protection mechanisms for the water and shoreline. But for now, at least, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Thornton's ambitious plans to transform our peaceful community into a luxury resort were in tatters. Karen's reign of HOA terror was over, and the corrupt officials who had enabled them were facing accountability. I'd come to Lake Evergreen seeking peace after years of military service, never expecting to find myself in yet another battle. But this fight had given me something I hadn't realized I was missing: a community, a purpose, and a sense of home that went beyond the walls of my cabin. As the sun began its descent toward the western shore, casting long reflections across the water, I made a silent promise to the lake that had brought me here, to continue protecting it, not just from Thornton and Lakeside, but from any who would exploit it for short-term gain at the expense of its enduring beauty. Some battles were worth fighting. This had definitely been one of them. 3 months later, I stood on my newly rebuilt dock, properly permitted and approved by the new HOA board, watching a sunset that painted Lake Evergreen in shades of gold and crimson. The summer had been unusually peaceful following the tumultuous events of the spring. The federal investigation had expanded to include 3 of Lakeside's previous development projects, with grand jury indictments against Thornton, Commissioner Wilson, and several other officials on charges ranging from bribery to wire fraud. Karen Millbrook had avoided indictment by agreeing to cooperate with prosecutors, though she still faced civil litigation from the HOA for financial mismanagement. Most satisfying of all, the Lake Evergreen Conservation Trust had been formally recognized by the state as a designated environmental protection entity, giving it special standing in any future development proposals affecting the watershed. Beautiful evening, Sarah observed, joining me on the dock. As the newly elected vice president of the HOA board, Stanley had taken the presidency. She had become a regular visitor as we worked together on community initiatives. Perfect, I agreed, handing her a beer from the cooler beside me. Hard to believe where we were 3 months ago. I was just thinking about that, she said, settling into one of the Adirondack chairs I'd built. Remember when Karen sent the sheriff out here to cite you for violations? I laughed. How could I forget? Best mistake she ever made. For us, definitely, Sarah agreed. Though I doubt she sees it that way. Marcus mentioned she's put her house on the market. Can't say I'm surprised. Hard to face your neighbors after what she did. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade from the sky as stars began to appear overhead. The gentle lapping of water against the dock pilings created a soothing rhythm. The trust meeting went well today, Sarah said eventually. The water quality testing program is officially launched. Volunteers from around the lake will be monitoring 10 different sites monthly. That's fantastic, I said. Early warning system for any potential issues. Exactly. and the county has finally agreed to stricter runoff regulations for any future construction within the watershed. Small victories, but they add up. Small victories indeed. Over the summer, we had methodically built protections for Lake Evergreen that would outlast any single development threat. The Trust now had conservation easements on key shoreline properties, water quality baselines established with state environmental authorities, and a growing endowment to fund ongoing protection efforts. Have you heard anything more about what happens to Lakeside's land holdings now that the company's essentially defunct? I asked. Sarah nodded. The receiver is looking to liquidate assets to cover legal costs and potential settlements. Stanley thinks the trust should try to acquire the most environmentally sensitive parcels. Good idea, I agreed. Keep them protected permanently. As darkness settled fully over the lake, the call of a loon echoed across the water, a haunting, triumphant sound that seemed to embody everything we'd been fighting for. Worth it, Sarah said softly, as if reading my thoughts. All of it. I nodded, raising my bottle in a silent toast to the lake, to the community that had come together to protect it, and to the unlikely journey that had brought us to this moment of peace. The battle for Lake Evergreen had been won not through any single heroic act, but through the collective determination of ordinary people who recognized that some places deserved to remain as nature intended them, unspoiled, accessible, and preserved for future generations. As for me, I had finally found what I'd been seeking when I purchased my cabin, not just a place to live, but a place worth fighting for, a community worth belonging to, and a purpose beyond myself. The lake shimmered under the rising moon, constant and enduring, as it had been long before any of us arrived and would continue to be long after we were gone, thanks in no small part to a former Army Ranger who just wanted a peaceful cabin by the water, and ended up with so much more.